I used to think I was a failure. Honestly, sometimes I still do. It feels like we live in a world where there's always someone better than you, someone smarter than you, someone more successful than you, and at an earlier age than you too. There's all these insanely competent people out there who have seemingly been doing it right since the moment they came out of the womb. So if you make just one mistake, how can you compete? I used to feel this way a lot, and I know I'm not the only one. I know tons of people in their 20s who look back and think, oh my god, I chose wrong, it's too late, and I'll never be able to do the things that I actually want to do. And I think it's just because of this way we've been brought up culturally where you always have to do everything perfectly. You go to school and then you go to college. You choose a major, get a job, and then you stay in that career path until the day you die. It's bleak and it leaves no room for error. You combine that with this feeling of being in a race with everyone, of needing to get ahead, of not falling behind, and it's paralyzing. There's so many things that I've always wanted to do, so many different passions that I have, and throughout my life I've been blocked from pursuing them in one way or another. And it's frustrating. I used to wake up every day with this constant feeling of frustration because I knew that there were interests and passions out there that I wanted to follow, but I was too busy following a path that somebody else chose for me, too busy climbing a ladder that I didn't care to reach the top of. It felt like I was falling behind, honestly, and you probably feel that way too. It probably paralyzes you in the same way it did me, but it's not true. You're not falling behind, you're just holding yourself back. You need to move forward, you need to change your thinking. And so here are 4 principles that did just that for me. So the first principle is to realize that life is long. A lot of the stress that comes from feeling like you're falling behind, I think, actually comes from this idea that you're running out of time, that you haven't yet done the things that you need to do and now it's too late, and you can't go back, you can't do it, and you're forever doomed to mediocrity. There's almost this pressure that feels like you have to have everything figured out by the time you're 20 or so, and I remember personally feeling like by the time that I was 30, my life would be over, and if I wasn't quote-unquote successful by that time, that I would never be. But not only is the idea that you have to pick your life's purpose by the age of 20 a ridiculous expectation, but I also just don't think it's true. A lot of people say that life is short, but I disagree. I think life is long, really long. The average lifespan in more developed countries, which you're probably in if you're watching this video, is coming on 80 years. And that's only continuing to grow with advancements in technology and medicine. Just from a quick Google search, it seems like most people agree that you can reach a senior level in most career paths within around 8 to 15 years. That means you could be 50 years old right now, having worked 30 years in a career path that you no longer care for, and you'd have plenty of time to go back, start from scratch, and become expert level. So what does that mean for you right now? Time isn't running out. You have several decades in front of you to learn, grow, and improve. You have time. The important thing is to actually do something with that time. If you stagnate, if you allow yourself to fall to inaction out of fear of falling behind, then you'll never move forward. This also means that you probably don't have as much pressure weighing you down right now as you probably feel you do. If you don't have one clearly defined goal for your life, but rather plenty of things that you'd like to chase, that's okay. You can have it all. You just have to change your perspective and think long term. You've got decades of time to do all of the things that you want to do. You don't have to choose between them. All you have to do is choose which you're going to do first, which you're going to do now. Adding on to that, mistakes are good. Depending on what standards you hold yourself to or how much of a perfectionist you are, this might sound ridiculous, but you should be actively wanting to make mistakes. I like to think of this in the context of an idea that's often used when training Olympic athletes called the rule of thirds. It goes sort of like this. When you're chasing a big dream, you should be feeling great a third of the time, okay a third of the time, and then crappy or not too great another third of the time. If you fall roughly within those ratios, then that means that you are in fact chasing a dream. If you feel too good all the time, if you're not making any mistakes, then you're probably not challenging yourself enough. If you always avoid making mistakes out of a fear of failure, then that just means you're not pushing yourself enough. You're staying in your comfort zone, and you're never going to grow from there. If you want a life that means anything, you will have to mess up. You're going to make mistakes, but that's exactly how you learn, and that's also how you know that you are, in fact, moving forward. Also, failure isn't always just what it seems. The future is chaotic, and there's so many variables at play at any given moment that it's really impossible to predict. Sometimes, our biggest failures are actually the biggest opportunities in disguise. Speaking of which, you don't have to follow through on a sunken cost. One day, maybe 16 or 17 years ago, I was sitting on the couch in the living room of my house, and I was watching a documentary. The documentary was talking about all these things that as a kid I just thought were really cool, like the universe and space and science fiction and like that type of stuff. The guy in the documentary introduced himself as a physicist, and from that day forward, I knew what I wanted to do with my life. I went through elementary school, middle school, high school with this sort of laser focus on my goal. I knew what I wanted to do and I was working towards it. I worked hard and improved my academics, and I even managed to get into college at 15. I wanted to be a physicist, and there was nothing that was going to stop me. Then I finally got into college, started studying physics, and I didn't like it. Thinking back on it, I really didn't like it. It was interesting, and I liked to read about it and to learn about it, but actually studying it, working on it, spending all my time alone in this dark lab looking at lasers, and all of my free time just trying to solve these complex equations, it just wasn't for me. But that was my life's purpose. I had given myself to that. That was the one goal I'd had my whole life, and it was too late now. I was locked in. I couldn't back out now. So I stuck with it. I just stayed on that path, and I continued at it, and I was miserable. By the time I reached my junior year of college, I was like full on depressed. I was working towards my life's goal, but I wanted no part in it. I had this insane cognitive dissonance that comes from working towards something that you have thrown so much love and effort and passion into for as long as you can remember, while also hating every second of it. And it was rough. I just couldn't do it anymore. I stopped showing up to classes, I stopped talking with my friends, and it felt like everything in my life was just falling apart. It took everything in my power to just graduate. And that's when something crazy happened. So while I was looking for a job in physics, still insanely in denial, I had a friend reach out to me about doing some software engineering work. It took a lot of convincing on his part. I wasn't really open to it at first, but I decided to give it a shot. And I fell in love with it. I just kept learning and learning and learning, and it just clicked with me in a way that nothing else really had before. And next thing I know, I'm working 12-hour days just because I love it so much. And, fast forward a few years, and now here I am, continuing to progress on that career, making significantly more than I ever would have been able to make working as a physicist, while still doing work that genuinely engages and interests me. Just because you make a decision doesn't mean you have to stick through with it. If I would have been stubborn and closed myself off to everything other than physics, then I would probably be a lot more miserable right now. You're not locked into the decisions that you've made in the past. Sometimes you're just wrong. Or sometimes maybe you make a decision because of someone else, or because of the opinions of others, or the expectations that you had placed on you. Maybe sometimes, you make a decision because you think you're really going to enjoy something and you end up hating it. When you're too rigid, you become brittle. You need to be flexible. You have to accept the idea that sometimes you'll need to pivot. And when you have to, not only will that not set you back or make you fall behind, but in fact, it will push you forward. Even starting over from scratch is never really starting from scratch. Skills always translate, and the experiences that you've had will help you in the future, sometimes even in ways that you don't expect. The fourth and final principle is to realize that the opinions of most other people don't really matter. Now, I say most other people because I do believe that you should have a select few people who you can trust to bring you back on track once you start falling off. But in general, I think that the opinions of most other people don't matter. I know that one of the reasons why I stayed on that physics track for as long as I did was because of the expectations of the people around me, the expectations of my family, my parents, even my friends who I didn't want to admit my failure to. It felt like I didn't have the freedom to grow. I was stuck. The thing is, you are the only person who you have to live with day in and day out. The most important relationship you'll ever have is the one that's with yourself. The most important opinions that matter are your own. If you allow yourself to be swayed by others, and you allow yourself to make decisions based off of them, you'll eventually come to resent them. All of the responsibility of the sadness and disappointment and frustration that you feel, you're going to push onto them. You're going to push it onto them, even if your original goal was just to make them happy. You're just not going to be happy living a life that somebody else chose for you. And so you need to take responsibility and figure out what it is that you want, what your opinions are. Also, I just feel like a lot of the substance from feeling like you're falling behind comes from comparison, that someone's smarter than you or better than you. But the thing is that you never really see the day-to-day of someone else's life. That's the problem with comparisons. You never really know what's going on. You're only at any given point in time getting what somebody else is portraying to you, what they want you to see. You're always going to be comparing your worst self to the best self of other people that they themselves put on display. Everyone's likely dealing with problems very similar to you, they're just hiding it, and nobody really knows what they're doing, they're all just figuring it out as they go. And also, people just don't really care about the things that you do, accomplish, or achieve as much as you think they do. Really, what people care about is who you are, your presence, your personality, all of which will benefit if you live in accordance with who you are, your wants and your goals, and all of which will suffer if you do otherwise. As a person who defines their self-worth by the things they do, this is something that I'm still having to come to terms with. So take those steps. Realize that life is long. Realize that you need to make mistakes if you want to grow. Stop following through on things you don't want just because of sunken costs, and realize that your own opinion and self-respect matter above all else.